What's going on, and welcome back to Unqualified Critics. So I had a revelation the other day, right? Been playing, like many of you, Streets of Rage 4. That's been the hottest story in retro gaming recently. But I'm playing it on my Xbox, and I look around my game room, it's full of these arcade machines. But here I am playing a game that really originally was an arcade game, and Streets of Rage 4 is very faithful to, say, the original Streets of Rage, but I'm playing it on a console. Now, obviously, everyone knows Streets of Rage had been ported to Sega Genesis. I've been playing Streets of Rage 2 on my Genesis Mini. There's nothing wrong with playing it on console, but doesn't it feel like a wasted opportunity for all of us who have these arcade machines? But we can't play these new games that are being made in the vein of a retro arcade game. Streets of Rage 4 is a great example, but even if you go back a little bit further, you've got Double Dragon Neon, you've got River City Girls from last year, which, side note, I finally bought and I'm hyped to play, don't judge me. And you've got just a general resurgence, I think, of high quality retro style 2D games. Shantae and the Half Genie Prince or Half Blood Prince or what? Well, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's a really good game made by the same team that did River City Girls. But the point is, these games are made to look and feel like you would have played in an arcade in the 80s or 90s, and yet we're playing them on a console, which would make sense, except many of us have all these arcade machines. Here's my point. I think this growing legion of us with arcade machines in our house, none of us existed 3 years ago, right? This market didn't exist. You had people that build their own machine and play games on it. It was so small you almost couldn't call that a market. It was just a mom and pop kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a very cool hobby, but it wasn't really a market that developers of new games could target. I believe there are enough of us now. Arcade1up is coming on up on its 1 millionth cabinet sold. I have no idea how many cabinets the Legends Ultimate has sold, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's well over 100,000. IA Arcade is coming out soon. We'll see how that does. Might do pretty well. There are a lot of interesting things there. I think the Legends Ultimate's going to continue to grow. Their biggest problem right now is keeping them in stock. Why can't I play Streets of Rage 4 on one of these machines? I think developers ought to start looking at these cabinets as targets for this, I don't know what you'd call it, but this genre of vintage style new games. Now, of all the big home arcade makers, only one player has said they want to target new games, and that is IA Arcade. But when they showcase new games, they showcase like modern style racing games, I think like Riptide or something, one of those water racing games. They showcase first person shooters. I love what IA Arcade's trying to do. I disagree with that approach. I think that playing a game that is designed for analog, subtle controls is much better left to PC and console. There's a reason why the joysticks on the console, you can push it a little or you can push it a lot, and that input registers differently. You need that level of precision. Same thing with a mouse on a PC. You really need that level of precision to be able to play a first-person shooter game that's in the modern style. But there's this whole world of games where I find myself when I'm on my Xbox, I'm using my Switch, I'm using the D-pad, I'm not using that joystick. And that's true for Streets of Rage 4. You can use either, but I just find it's more comfortable to use the D-pad. It's an old school digital style game. What if we got those kind of games on IA Arcade and on these other consoles? And there's kind of a history of that, and basically it's taking a modern game and shrinking it down so that it runs on mobile. And they target all these different mobile devices with all different specs, spread out across Android phones and even different levels of iPhone. The same thing could be done for these system on a chips that are basically little mobile phone chips, although they're pretty simplistic, but the ones you find in Arcade1up or Legends Ultimate. Now, don't get me wrong, we would need more power than we're currently getting. I think IA Arcade is on the right track. If you watch the video I did on their recent announcement from about a week ago, and I'll put a link above, they talk about the specs. I don't remember them offhand or have them in front of me, but those are specs substantial enough to play a version of Streets of Rage 4. I guarantee it. They might have to dumb down Streets of Rage 4 a little bit, but it would absolutely run on that hardware. Just the same as you could run Streets of Rage 4 on your phone if the developers wanted to target phone as a platform. Now, if you think about the license holders of these games, the same companies that hold the licenses for a Streets of Rage or whatever, those are the same companies that also hold the licenses for older games. Take the Street Fighter cabinet, for example. We can buy a Street Fighter 2 cabinet from Arcade1up. We can play various versions of Street Fighter 2. Capcom, of course, also owns the licenses to Street Fighter 3 and Street Fighter 3 Alpha and Street Fighter 4 and even Street Fighter 5. We can't play those on arcade because the hardware is not sophisticated enough, and because Arcade1up to date has just targeted that vintage enthusiast. But eventually they will have made all the vintage enthusiast games. They've talked about a 3-year roadmap, and I know their goal is to not give us all the games at once, and they're kind of spacing it out, which I completely respect that they're doing. But even if you start getting into the 90s era games, you will eventually run out of games to re-release. But you know what you won't run out of are all these new games that are coming out. And there's not a ton of them, but I do think the numbers will grow. I'm sure Streets of Rage 4 is selling very, very well. What about Street Fighter 5? What about Mortal Kombat 10? What about Mortal Kombat 11? Currently, the only way to play these on arcade, at least of these arcade products I'm talking about, I'm not talking about something you build yourself, I'm not talking about a mod project, I'm talking about an actual product. The only way I know of is to stream it to your Legends Ultimate, either using the BYOG servers that AtGames brings to the table that you can pay for, or streaming it from your local PC. And that is legitimately pretty cool. But I think there's an opportunity that's going to emerge over the next 1 to 2 years as these chipsets come down in price and get more powerful that are being used in the arcade form factor. There will be an opportunity to sell you, I believe, sell us, a Mortal Kombat 11 cabinet. Now, even though a lot of these games like Streets of Rage 4, Mortal Kombat 11, they never existed in the arcade. I don't even think there's an arcade version of Street Fighter 5. I could be wrong. I don't really follow fighting games, but I've never seen one, and I've been in some arcades lately, including like the modern Dave & Buster's stuff. But that doesn't change the fact that these games have arcade DNA in them, and the new format might not be to sell a $3,000 arcade machine for commercial use. That doesn't really work anymore unless it's like a bar arcade, and then those guys want the retro games anyway. The new version of selling modern arcades is to sell them to you and I, and we won't pay $3,000 bucks. But would you pay $800 for a Mortal Kombat 11 arcade machine? I bet some people would. Would you pay $600 for a Streets of Rage 4 machine? I bet some people would. So here's my take on this. For AtGames, could they do something like this? Yeah, I think they could absolutely release a Legends Ultimate Deluxe version, Legends Ultimate Supreme, whatever you want to call it, but a super version with the same arcade, but with much beefier computer internals that could run these more modern games. It'd be closer to the chipset you would get in a mid-range cell phone. I'm not talking about PC level stuff here, but I'm talking about like a legitimate smartphone chipset. And I think they could probably get away with selling that for $700 to $900. It's a larger cabinet. People already are happy to pay $600 for the Legends Ultimate as it stands. A couple $100 more to offset the chipset price, they could sell that to you. Arcade1up wouldn't be able to sell for $800. Their goal is they need to be at a price point where you and I can buy 5 of them, because that's their whole plan, right? They want to sell a bunch of different cabinets. But here's what they could do. They could sell you a Street Fighter cabinet that includes all the Street Fighter 2s, Street Fighter 3, Street Fighter 3 Alpha, some of those getting into the little bit more demanding stuff. It would have to come with pretty beefy hardware like I just described, but then let us buy Street Fighter 4, and I'm just using that as an example, but you guys know what I mean. Let us buy that ROM and download it and add it to the cabinet. Arcade games have a history of being much more expensive than a console or PC version. If the console version of Street Fighter 5 is $30, I think people would pay $60 to $80 for a really great version that runs flawlessly on a dedicated arcade machine. Streets of Rage 4 is a $30 game too, and I can tell you I would pay $60 to $100 to add it to a Sega cabinet that includes Streets of Rage 1, 2, and 3 out of the box, right? Or I don't know actually which one of those were ever released in arcade. Let's just say it includes the original Streets of Rage that was in arcade. Buy that cabinet for $300. I would pay another $100 to download Streets of Rage 4. And I think a lot of people would. So it's all about just for these developers that create these games, finding new places to sell those games, and for this world of hardware manufacturers like Arcade1up, AtGames Legends Ultimate, and even iArcade, it's about presenting this growing customer base of you, me, everyone who watches these videos, and 500,000 more people. It's about recognizing that as a market now. We're the people that are buying Streets of Rage 4 on PlayStation and PC. Let us buy it on arcade and play it kind of the way it was meant to be played. I've mentioned II Arcade. They're the first company to target modern games, and I think as a concept that's a great idea. That's everything this video is about. I think it really could work. I do think, and I really like the founder of the company, but I do think the direction initially that they're taking on modern games is wrong. Let me explain. In all the promotional footage we've seen, they show retro games, Double Dragon, cool. But then they show modern games like first-person shooters. They show a modern racing game. I think they had like Riptide or something on there. Those are the kind of games that are optimized for analog controls. And if you're not familiar, digital versus analog. Digital might sound more sophisticated, but in this case, it's actually not. Digital would be like a D-pad on your controller. You press up, you go up. Doesn't matter how hard you press. On a joystick, you have a large number of gradations that you can push to different angles. You can push harder, you can push softer. Same thing with a computer mouse. You can roll it around slowly, you can roll it around quickly. Games have been optimized for that kind of subtle control. Racing games, first-person shooters, all of that. I don't think that's a good fit for an arcade cabinet. Whenever I see somebody playing an Xbox game on their arcade, I think it's kind of ridiculous. Those games just were not made for old-school arcade joysticks. But again, there are a class of new games that were made for that kind of control. Every time I play Streets of Rage 4 on my Xbox, I'm not using the joystick, even though I could. I'm using the D-pad. Works great, feels perfectly natural. You would lose nothing if that game were ported to a control with a Sanwa or a Hap joystick. So I think, and I hope, II Arcade will start targeting those types of modern games. Now, they're a new platform, so they can't be super picky. They've got to kind of take what they can get. But as they sell more cabinets, that will become a market opportunity for the developers who've already made these games. Optimize them for a slightly weaker chipset, and we're off to the races. And let us buy that game, and we'll pay a premium for a new game. No one wants to pay $50 for a version of Centipede that you can play on your arcade, because that's an old game. We recognize that. But I think you'd pay 50 or $100 for a modern game on an arcade if it was done correctly. And I think the fact that Arcade1up is closing in on 1 million cabinets sold tells me there is this new hidden platform of vintage gaming, and it's yet to be tapped. So I would love to see that tapped. I would love to see that change. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Am I crazy and maybe you just want to stick with games like Burger Time and Asteroids? There's nothing wrong with that. That's what got us all here to begin with. Maybe I'm off base. You can let me know. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure to hit like. I'd really appreciate it. If you've been watching the channel and you enjoy it, make sure to subscribe. We're about to hit 45,000 subs. Means a lot. Very much appreciate when you guys watch. Let me know below what you think, and I'll talk to you guys later.
Dripping lights paint the sky.